In 1987, during a routine cleaning of the Vatican archives, a sealed chest that had remained untouched for 140 years was discovered. Inside, documents bearing the signatures of 12 cardinals revealed history's most horrifying truth. Between 1847 and 1850, during sacred feast ceremonies held on the first Friday night of every month, the bodies of 36 children were consumed to recreate Christ's Last Supper. 3 different popes refused to view these documents. The fourth ordered the file permanently closed. So why has the Vatican been hiding this truth from the world for 150 years? Before we descend into the darkness that consumed 12 of the Catholic Church's most powerful men, I need to ask something of you. This channel isn't for everyone, only for those brave enough to confront the most disturbing truths hidden behind the walls of religious institutions. If you're one of the few who can handle these dark revelations, subscribe now and leave a comment telling me what country you're listening from. Your support helps us uncover the stories that others dare not tell. Now, let's journey back to 1847, when faith became an excuse for the unthinkable. The year 1847 marked a turbulent period in Vatican history. Pope Pius I had just begun his papacy, inheriting a Catholic Church struggling with revolutionary movements sweeping across Europe. Rome itself was on the brink of political upheaval, with secret societies and anti-clerical sentiments threatening the very foundation of papal authority. Within this chaos, the Vatican's inner circle became a breeding ground for desperate men seeking power through any means necessary. Cardinal Lorenzo Santori owned a magnificent villa on the outskirts of Rome, a sprawling estate hidden behind ancient cypress trees and high stone walls. To the outside world, this was merely a retreat where senior church officials gathered for prayer and theological discussion. But beneath the marble floors and ornate chandeliers, in a basement that appeared on no architectural plans, something far more sinister was taking place. The first documented gathering occurred on Friday, March 5, 1847. 12 cardinals arrived separately throughout the evening, each entering through different entrances to avoid drawing attention. These were not minor church officials, but members of the sacred college itself, men who had the power to elect popes and shape Catholic doctrine for millions of believers worldwide. Their names read like a registry of the Church's most influential figures: Cardinal Alessandro Borromeo, Cardinal Vincenzo de Rossi, Cardinal Matteo Salvatore, and 9 others whose identities would remain sealed in Vatican documents for over a century. According to the recovered documents, the gathering was initiated by Cardinal Santori himself, a theologian known for his controversial interpretations of transubstantiation, the Catholic doctrine that bread and wine literally become the body and blood of Christ during Mass. Santori had developed a twisted theological argument that haunted him for years. If consuming Christ's symbolic body granted spiritual salvation, then consuming actual innocent flesh, the flesh of those without sin, might grant physical immortality and divine power. The basement chamber had been transformed into a grotesque mockery of the Last Supper. A long oak table stretched across the center of the room, with 13 chairs arranged around it, 12 for the cardinals and 1 left empty, supposedly reserved for Christ himself. The walls were lined with religious paintings, but these had been altered in disturbing ways. Faces of saints had been painted over with demonic features, and scenes of martyrdom had been modified to show the martyrs being consumed rather than killed. The first victim was a 7-year-old boy named Paolo Martinelli, the son of a poor widow who worked as a washerwoman for the church. Cardinal de Rossi had personally selected the child, using the pretense of offering him education at a Vatican school. The boy's mother was told he would be trained to become a priest, a tremendous honor for a family of their status. She never saw her son again. The ritual that first night followed a carefully planned sequence that would be repeated 35 more times over the next 3 years. The child was brought to the chamber sedated with laudanum, unaware of his surroundings. Cardinal Santori, acting as the twisted equivalent of a priest celebrating Mass, stood at the head of the table and recited a perverted version of the Eucharistic prayer. Instead of "This is my body, which will be given up for you," he spoke words that made even these hardened men tremble. "This is the body of innocence, which we consume to transcend mortality." What followed was documented in excruciating detail in Cardinal Borromeo's private journal, a leather-bound book discovered within the sealed chest. The cardinals believed that by consuming the flesh of unbaptized or newly baptized children, those who had not yet committed sin, they could absorb purity itself and reverse the aging process. Medical records attached to the documents show that Vatican physicians were required to examine each cardinal monthly, and the results were indeed anomalous. Several cardinals showed signs of age regression, with wrinkles diminishing and hair darkening. One cardinal's medical file noted with alarm that he appeared 20 years younger after 6 months of the rituals. But this apparent success came at a price far beyond the moral depravity of their actions. The documents reveal that the cardinals began experiencing disturbing psychological changes. Cardinal Salvatore's diary entries became increasingly erratic, filled with descriptions of nightmares where the children appeared to him, their eyes accusing, their mouths forming words he could not understand. Cardinal de Rossi developed a compulsion to wash his hands hundreds of times each day, scrubbing until his skin bled, yet never feeling clean. The selection of victims followed a careful pattern designed to avoid detection. The cardinals chose children from the poorest families, street orphans, or those whose parents could be easily deceived or silenced with money. In some cases, families were told their children had been accepted into special church programs and had been sent to distant monasteries. Others were told their children had died from illness and had been buried in consecrated ground, their bodies supposedly too diseased to be viewed. Father Giuseppe Romani, a young priest who served as Cardinal Santori's secretary, became suspicious after noticing the pattern of children entering the villa but never leaving. His private letters, also found in the chest, describe his growing horror as he pieced together what was occurring. In one letter to his brother, he wrote, "I fear I work in the house of demons wearing the robes of holy men. Children arrive with hope in their eyes and vanish into the basement, never to be seen again. I hear prayers below, but they are prayers that make my soul scream in agony." Father Romani's investigation would prove both brave and fatal. He managed to gain access to the basement chamber one night when the cardinals were not present, and what he found confirmed his worst fears. Hidden behind a false wall was a small chapel that had been converted into a preparation room. Here he discovered evidence that shattered any remaining doubt: children's clothing, small shoes arranged in rows, and most damning of all, a ledger documenting dates, names and ages. 36 entries over 3 years, each marked with a red seal bearing Cardinal Santori's personal insignia. But Father Romani made a crucial error. In his shock and horror, he confronted Cardinal Borromeo, the man he believed might have some conscience remaining. He was wrong. Rather than finding an ally, he found himself facing men who had long ago crossed a threshold from which there could be no return. Cardinal Borromeo's response, documented in his own journal, was chilling. "The young priest has discovered our sacred work. He cannot understand that we do God's will by transcending the limitations he placed upon us. We are becoming something greater than human, closer to divine." Father Romani disappeared that very night. Official Vatican records state he requested a transfer to a distant mission and was never heard from again. But Cardinal Santori's personal papers tell a different story. In barely legible handwriting, presumably written while intoxicated, Santori confessed, "The priest became our 37th blessing. His flesh was bitter with knowledge and fear. We consumed him not for youth, but for silence." By 1850, the rituals had become increasingly elaborate and depraved. No longer satisfied with simple consumption, the cardinals had begun incorporating elements of various heresies and occult practices they had studied in forbidden texts within the Vatican library. They believed they were approaching a breakthrough, a final transformation that would grant them not just extended life, but genuine immortality and power over death itself. However, their actions had not gone entirely unnoticed. Strange rumors began circulating in Rome about missing children and unusual activities at Cardinal Santori's villa. Several families had become suspicious when promised letters from their children never arrived. A group of mothers, led by the washerwoman whose son Paolo had been the first victim, began asking uncomfortable questions at Vatican offices. The situation reached a critical point when one of the cardinals, Cardinal Francesco Alberti, suffered a complete mental breakdown during a ceremony in April 1850. According to witness accounts from the other cardinals, Alberti began screaming that the children were speaking to him, that their voices filled his head with accusations and curses. He ran from the chamber into the villa's main hall, where servants heard him shrieking about innocent blood and demons wearing red hats. He died 3 days later, officially from a sudden fever, but Cardinal Borromeo's journal suggests something darker. Alberti's mind shattered like glass. He saw what we refused to see, that we had not ascended toward divinity, but descended into something far worse. His death may have been a mercy. This incident forced the remaining 11 cardinals to confront a terrifying reality. Their quest for transcendence had led them not to divine power, but to psychological disintegration. The very children they had consumed seemed to be consuming them from within, destroying their sanity piece by piece. Medical examinations showed increasingly disturbing symptoms among all participants: insomnia, paranoid delusions, unexplained physical pains, and in some cases, the emergence of behaviors that suggested their personalities were fragmenting. It was at this moment of crisis that Pope Pius I then learned of the gatherings. How the information reached him remains unclear, but documents suggest that Cardinal Alberti, in his final fevered ravings, had spoken too freely within earshot of Vatican officials. The Pope faced an impossible choice: expose the truth and shatter faith in the Church at a time when it was already under siege from revolutionary forces, or suppress the evidence and ensure such evil never occurred again. The Pope chose suppression, but not silence. In a secret consistory held in late 1850, he confronted the 11 surviving cardinals. No transcript of this meeting exists, but its aftermath speaks volumes. All 11 cardinals were simultaneously removed from their positions and sent to remote monasteries in different corners of the Catholic world, places where they would remain until their deaths, forbidden from ever communicating with each other or returning to Rome. Cardinal Santori's villa was purchased by the Vatican and demolished, every stone scattered, every timber burned. The basement chamber was filled with concrete and blessed earth. The families of the victims were told nothing. Most never learned the true fate of their children. Some were given financial compensation through intermediaries, money delivered with vague explanations about accidents or illnesses. The mothers who had been asking questions found themselves facing pressure from church authorities and, in some cases, threats. The washerwoman who had lost her son Paolo was offered a substantial sum to leave Rome forever, which she accepted, broken by grief and powerless against the institution she had once trusted. All documents related to the case were gathered and sealed in a chest marked with the papal seal, with orders that it should never be opened without direct authorization from a sitting pope. The chest was placed in the deepest section of the Vatican secret archives, in a chamber reserved for the Church's most dangerous secrets. And there it remained for 137 years, until that fateful day in 1987, when renovation work required the chamber to be cleared. The discovery of the chest created immediate crisis within the Vatican. The archivist who first opened it and read the contents required psychological counseling for months afterward. A special commission of cardinals was convened to determine what to do with this knowledge. Once again, the Church faced the same choice Pope Pius I had confronted: revelation or concealment. Once again, they chose to protect the institution over truth. The documents were resealed, this time with additional restrictions, and the chest was returned to the archives with a classification level that ensures it will not be opened again for at least another century. But secrets, particularly secrets involving this much suffering and evil, have a way of escaping even the most secure vaults. Copies of some documents were made before the chest was resealed. Whispers began to circulate among historians and Vatican researchers. Fragments of the story leaked into academic circles, though always dismissed as conspiracy theories or anti-Catholic propaganda. For decades, the full truth remained just beyond reach, acknowledged by some, denied by others, but never fully revealed. The medical aspects of the case continue to baffle researchers who have managed to review the limited information available. Did the cardinals actually experience age regression, or was this a delusion born from their twisted beliefs? The clinical notes suggest real physical changes occurred, documented by Vatican physicians who had no knowledge of the rituals. Yet modern science offers no mechanism by which such changes could result from their actions. Perhaps the stress and guilt manifested in ways that mimicked youth, or perhaps something occurred that science cannot yet explain. What we do know with certainty is that the 11 surviving cardinals all died within 15 years of the ritual's ending, most under mysterious circumstances. Cardinal Borromeo hanged himself in his monastery cell in 1856, leaving behind a confession that was immediately confiscated and sealed. Cardinal de Rossi died in an asylum in 1858, his final years spent in a state of catatonic terror, responding to nothing except the word Paolo, which would send him into screaming fits. Cardinal Santori, the architect of the entire horror, survived the longest, dying in 1862 in a remote monastery in the mountains of Switzerland. The monks there reported that in his final months he spoke only in Latin, repeating the same phrase over and over: "They are inside me now, all of them waiting." The children, of course, received no justice. Their names exist only in that hidden ledger, their bodies never recovered, their families never granted the truth. Somewhere in the hills outside Rome, perhaps scattered across the grounds where Cardinal Santori's villa once stood, lie the remains of 36 young lives taken for the mad ambitions of men who believed themselves above God's law. This case represents one of the darkest chapters in Catholic Church history, not just for the crimes themselves, but for the systematic suppression of truth that followed. It reveals how even the most sacred institutions can harbor unfathomable evil when power is combined with secrecy and unchecked theological obsession. The cardinals believed they were approaching divinity, but they had instead descended into the deepest pits of human depravity. The story of the Crimson Cardinals feast serves as a horrifying reminder that the pursuit of immortality and power can lead men to commit acts that strip away every trace of their humanity. These were not uneducated men driven by superstition, but highly intelligent theologians who twisted their own faith into justification for evil. They wore the symbols of holiness while committing acts of supreme blasphemy, proving that the darkest evil often hides behind the most respectable masks. But this is only the beginning of the story. The 11 Cardinals were not the only ones involved in this horror, and their rituals were not isolated incidents. In the next episode, we will uncover how their twisted theology spread to other members of the church hierarchy, creating a secret network that extended far beyond Rome. We will discover what happened to those who tried to expose the truth, and we will reveal evidence that suggests similar rituals may have occurred in other locations, hidden within the vast structure of the Catholic Church. The question that haunts us now is not just what happened in that basement chamber between 1847 and 1850, but whether it truly ended then, or if it merely went deeper underground, continuing in shadows where even Vatican archives cannot reach. Some researchers who have studied the fragments of this case believe that certain unexplained disappearances of children near church properties in the decades that followed may be connected. Others point to strange references in later church documents that seem to echo the theological justifications used by Cardinal Santori. What we know for certain is that the Vatican's decision to suppress rather than address this evil created conditions where similar acts might occur again. By choosing institutional preservation over justice for victims, the Church ensured that this dark knowledge remained accessible to those within its walls who might be tempted to follow the same horrifying path. Evil, when hidden rather than confronted, does not disappear. It festers, waiting for the next moment of weakness, the next desperate soul seeking power through forbidden means. The 36 children who died in Cardinal Santori's basement deserve more than to be forgotten secrets in a sealed chest. Their story must be told, not to attack faith itself, but to remind us that no institution, no matter how sacred, is immune to corruption when its leaders place their own desires above basic human morality. The red robes of cardinals, meant to symbolize willingness to shed blood for faith, became in this case symbols of blood actually shed in pursuit of twisted ambition. As we close this first chapter of the Crimson Cardinals' feast, remember that history's darkest truths often lie not in distant myths or supernatural tales, but in the documented actions of real people who convinced themselves that their evil was justified. The basement of that villa was not a gateway to hell, it was hell itself, created by human hands and human choices, sanctified by perverted prayers and hidden behind walls of respectability. In our next episode, we will follow the thread of this conspiracy beyond Rome, into the network of monasteries and cathedrals, where evidence suggests these practices may have continued. We will uncover the fate of those who tried to bring this horror to light, and we will explore the possibility that the Vatican's archives contain evidence of similar cases, equally buried, equally protected from the world's knowledge. The truth is there, waiting in the darkness, written in documents that powerful men have tried for over a century to keep hidden. But some truths are too terrible to remain buried forever, and this is one of them. The 11 cardinals exiled from Rome in 1850 were supposed to live out their remaining days in silence, forbidden from contact with each other or the outside world. But what Pope Pius IX didn't realize was that their twisted theology had already spread like a virus through certain circles of the church hierarchy. Before we reveal how deep this conspiracy truly went, I need to know you're ready for what comes next. If you've made it this far, you're not afraid of the truth. Hit that like button and let me know in the comments, do you believe evil can truly be contained, or does it always find a way to spread? Let's find out together. In the autumn of 1851, a Benedictine monastery in the mountains of Bavaria reported an unusual death. Brother Wilhelm Hartmann, a monk who had served there for 30 years, was found dead in the monastery's ancient wine cellar. His body was surrounded by candles arranged in a circular pattern, and in his hands was a letter bearing a red wax seal. The abbot, Father Johannes Kroos, immediately recognized the seal's symbol. It was identical to the one used by Cardinal Santori in Rome. The letter contained a single sentence in Latin: "The work must continue in new vessels." Father Kroos had never heard of Cardinal Santori or the events in Rome. The Vatican's suppression had been so complete that even senior church officials remained ignorant of what had transpired. But Brother Wilhelm's personal journals, discovered hidden beneath a loose stone in his cell, told a different story. He had been corresponding with one of the exiled cardinals for months, receiving detailed instructions on how to continue the sacred work far from Rome's watchful eyes. The journals revealed that Brother Wilhelm had been preparing the monastery's wine cellar for rituals identical to those conducted in Cardinal Santori's basement. He had selected 3 novice monks, young men barely 18 years old who had recently taken their vows, as his intended assistants. But his death, apparently from a sudden heart attack during a practice ritual, had prevented the plan from reaching fruition. Or so everyone believed. Father Kroos, a man of deep faith but also practical wisdom, made a decision that would prove fateful. Rather than report this discovery to Vatican authorities, he chose to investigate quietly on his own. He began examining the monastery's records of correspondence, looking for any connection between Brother Wilhelm and the outside world. What he found was far more disturbing than a single corrupted monk. Over the course of 2 years, Brother Wilhelm had received letters from 5 different locations across Europe: a cathedral in Lyon, France, a convent in Bruges, Belgium, a seminary in Krakow, Poland, a bishop's residence in Dublin, Ireland, and a Jesuit college in Salamanca, Spain. Each letter bore the same red seal. Each contained fragments of theological arguments justifying the consumption of innocent flesh as a path to divine transcendence. And each suggested that the sender was not merely studying this heresy, but actively practicing it. The network that Cardinal Santori had helped create had metastasized, spreading to distant corners of the Catholic world, where detection seemed impossible, and where ambitious clergymen saw an opportunity to achieve what they believed was forbidden knowledge. Father Kroos knew he was facing a conspiracy that extended far beyond his authority to address. He made copies of the most incriminating documents and sealed them in a package addressed to the Vatican. Then he did something remarkable. He also sent copies to 3 trusted contacts outside the Church, historians and journalists, who he believed would preserve the evidence even if the Church chose suppression once again. This decision would cost him his life, but it would also ensure that fragments of the truth survived for future generations. The package reached the Vatican in December 1851. Its arrival created immediate panic among those who knew the truth about Cardinal Santori's case. A secret investigation was launched, led by Cardinal Antonio Fiori, a man known for his ruthless efficiency in handling church scandals. His mission was clear: identify every member of this network and eliminate the threat before it could expose the Church to public scandal, or worse, before their rituals could actually achieve whatever dark transformation they sought. Cardinal Fiori's investigation uncovered a conspiracy far more extensive than anyone had imagined. The network included not just the 5 locations identified in Brother Wilhelm's correspondence, but at least 12 other sites across Europe, and even 3 in the Americas. In total, 47 priests, monks, bishops, and even 2 archbishops were implicated in various stages of planning or conducting similar rituals. Some had already claimed victims. Others were still in preparatory stages, gathering theological justifications and identifying potential targets. The case of the Convent of the Sacred Blood in Bruges proved particularly horrifying. Mother Superior Marguerite van der Meer had received detailed instructions from one of the exiled cardinals and had begun conducting her own version of the rituals in 1850. Unlike the Roman cardinals who had targeted street children, Mother Superior Marguerite chose victims from within her own convent, young novices who had recently taken their vows, girls barely 16 years old who had come seeking spiritual refuge. Over 18 months, 7 young women disappeared from the convent. The official explanation given to their families was that they had been transferred to missionary work in Africa, a common practice that few questioned. In reality, their remains were buried beneath the convent's chapel, in a crypt that Mother Superior Marguerite had converted into her own twisted sanctuary. When Vatican investigators finally arrived in 1852, they found the crypt decorated with perverted religious imagery and a ledger documenting dates, names, and detailed descriptions of the rituals conducted. What made Mother Superior Marguerite's case particularly disturbing was her theological rationalization. In her private writings, she argued that young women who had dedicated their lives to Christ represented the purest form of innocent flesh, superior even to unbaptized children. She believed that by consuming the bodies of these brides of Christ, she was literally incorporating their spiritual devotion into herself, creating a direct connection to the divine. Her journal entries showed increasing megalomania, with later passages suggesting she believed she was becoming a female Christ figure, capable of performing miracles and transcending death. The Vatican's response to Mother Superior Marguerite was swift and brutal. She was arrested in the middle of the night, taken to a secret facility operated by the Church, and according to whispered rumors that circulated for years afterward, subjected to an ancient form of interrogation designed to extract information about any other conspirators she might know. She revealed names and locations that led to the discovery of 3 more sites where similar rituals were being planned or conducted. Then she disappeared from all records. Official documents state she died of natural causes while in custody, but no burial record exists, no grave marker bears her name. Meanwhile, Father Crodz's attempt to expose the conspiracy had indeed cost him his life. In March 1852, he was found dead in his quarters at the Bavarian monastery, officially another victim of sudden heart failure. But several monks reported seeing strangers in clerical garb visiting the monastery the night before his death, men who spoke with Italian accents and who left before dawn. The copies of documents that Father Crodz had sent to his contacts outside the church were never acknowledged publicly, but they survived in private collections, eventually making their way into the hands of researchers who would piece together fragments of this story over the following century. The cathedral in Lyon presented a different variation of the horror. Bishop Laurent Beaumont had not begun conducting rituals himself, but had instead created a school of theology where he taught select students the philosophical framework that justified such acts. His curriculum included study of ancient heresies, particularly Gnostic texts that suggested the material world was inherently corrupt and that transcendence required transgression of conventional morality. Over 3 years, Bishop Beaumont had prepared a generation of priests who viewed cannibalistic rituals not as evil, but as a necessary step towards spiritual enlightenment. When Vatican investigators raided the seminary in Lyon, they found a library of forbidden texts that Bishop Beaumont had assembled over decades. These included not just theological works, but practical guides, methods of sedation, techniques of butchery, even recipes for preparing human flesh in ways that disguised its nature. Most disturbing of all was a document titled The Sacrament of Transubstantiation Fulfilled, a 200-page treatise arguing that the Catholic Church had misunderstood Christ's commandment at the Last Supper. According to Bishop Beaumont's interpretation, Jesus had not intended bread and wine to merely symbolize his body and blood, but had established a literal commandment that his followers should consume human flesh, as he had offered his own. 12 of Bishop Beaumont's students had already been ordained as priests and assigned to parishes across France. Vatican investigators had to quietly track down each one, determine whether they had acted on their teachings, and either silence them through exile or, in some cases that remain officially unacknowledged, through more permanent means. Bishop Beaumont himself was taken to Rome, where he faced a secret ecclesiastical trial. His fate remains one of the Vatican's most closely guarded secrets, though documents that surfaced in the 1920s suggest he was confined to a secure facility beneath the Vatican itself, where he remained until his death in 1869. The investigation also revealed something that terrified Vatican officials even more than the network's extent: evidence that the rituals might actually work. Medical examinations of several captured participants showed anomalous results, similar to those documented in the Roman Cardinals case. Age regression, enhanced cognitive function, and in some cases, apparent immunity to certain diseases. The Vatican's own physicians were at a loss to explain these findings. Were they dealing with psychological phenomena, the power of belief manifesting in physical ways? Or had these men stumbled upon some dark truth about human biology that science could not yet explain? This question led to one of the most controversial decisions in the Church's handling of the crisis. Rather than destroy all evidence, a secret research program was established within the Vatican to study the medical findings. A small group of trusted physicians and theologians was tasked with understanding what had occurred, not to replicate it, but to ensure the Church could recognize and prevent similar cases in the future. This program, codenamed the Lazarus Documentation, operated in absolute secrecy for over 50 years, its findings locked away in vaults that not even most cardinals knew existed. The Lazarus Documentation's conclusions, partially revealed when fragments leaked in the early 1900s, were deeply unsettling. The researchers concluded that the psychological conviction held by the ritual participants created measurable physiological changes, but these changes came at catastrophic cost to mental stability. Every subject studied showed progressive psychological deterioration, with symptoms including paranoid delusions, auditory hallucinations, and eventually complete personality disintegration. The apparent benefits of age regression and health improvements were temporary, inevitably followed by rapid collapse. In essence, the rituals created the illusion of transcendence while actually destroying the practitioner from within. By 1854, Cardinal Fiore's investigation had identified and neutralized all known members of the network. 47 church officials had been removed from their positions, 14 sites had been raided and cleansed, and countless documents had been confiscated and sealed. The Vatican believed the crisis had been contained, but they were wrong. The ideas that Cardinal Santori had unleashed could not be so easily suppressed because they had been recorded, studied, and in some cases passed down through channels the investigators never discovered. In remote regions of South America, where the Church's authority was strong but its oversight was weak, rumors persisted of priests conducting strange rituals among indigenous populations. In Eastern Europe, where Catholic and Orthodox churches coexisted uneasily, there were whispered stories of monasteries where monks practiced secret rites that involved the consumption of flesh. The Vatican received reports of these rumors, but could never gather sufficient evidence to investigate. The network had learned from its exposure future practitioners would be more careful, more hidden, and more patient. The psychological impact on those who investigated this conspiracy was profound. Cardinal Fiore himself, after completing his mission, requested reassignment to a remote monastery where he spent his final years in prayer and penance. His private letters, later discovered, revealed a man tormented by what he had learned. He wrote, "I have seen the face of evil wearing the mask of faith, and I can never again look upon a cardinal's red robes without seeing blood. The Church claims to be the bride of Christ, but I have discovered a cancer within her body that may never be fully removed." Other investigators met worse fates. Father Marco Benedetti, a priest who had helped Cardinal Fiore identify network members in Italy, began experiencing vivid nightmares after reading the confiscated documents. His dreams were filled with images of children calling out for help while church bells rang in mockery of their suffering. Within a year, he had suffered a complete mental breakdown and spent the rest of his life in an asylum, unable to speak coherently, responding only to the sound of church bells with screams of terror. The families of victims from all these locations never received truth or justice. Most were told comforting lies about their loved ones being called to special service or dying of natural causes in distant lands. Some families received financial compensation through anonymous channels, money that arrived with no explanation and no acknowledgement of why it was given. The Church's priority remained protecting its institutional reputation rather than providing closure to those who had suffered loss. Perhaps most tragic were the cases that were never investigated at all. The Vatican's resources were limited, and the conspiracy's reach was vast. Researchers who later studied fragments of this case estimate that for every site discovered and cleansed, at least 2 more went undetected. How many victims were claimed by these hidden cells? How many priests carried Santori's twisted theology into their work without ever being identified? The true death toll of the Crimson Cardinals' feast may never be known. The network's suppression also revealed uncomfortable truths about the Church's power structure. Many of the conspirators had been able to operate for years precisely because their positions granted them immunity from normal oversight. Who questions a bishop's activities within his own diocese? Who investigates a Mother Superior's management of her convent? The conspiracy had exploited the very hierarchy designed to organize and protect the Church, using it instead as a shield for unspeakable crimes. This realization led to quiet reforms within the Vatican's administrative structure. New oversight mechanisms were created, though their true purpose was never publicly acknowledged. The office that would later become known as the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith was given expanded powers to investigate internal church matters, powers that officially were meant to combat heresy, but were actually designed to prevent another Santori-style conspiracy from taking root. The Church had learned that external threats were not its greatest danger. The real threat came from within, from those who twisted faith into justification for evil. By 1860, the active phase of the conspiracy had been eliminated, but its legacy continued to haunt the Vatican. Every few years, reports would surface of priests or monastics found dead under mysterious circumstances, often surrounded by evidence of strange rituals. Each case raised the terrifying question, were these isolated individuals acting on their own twisted impulses, or were they the visible traces of a network that had gone even deeper underground, learning from past mistakes, waiting for the right moment to resurface? The 11 original cardinals from Rome all died within 15 years of their exile, as mentioned in our previous episode. But what wasn't revealed then was that several of them managed to write extensive theological treatises defending their actions before their deaths. These documents, confiscated by Vatican authorities, contain detailed instructions for conducting the rituals, philosophical arguments for their necessity, and most disturbing of all, prophecies about what they believed would occur when enough practitioners achieved the transcendence they sought. They envisioned a new church emerging, led by immortal priest-kings who had conquered death itself through the consumption of innocence. These treatises were never destroyed, despite multiple recommendations that they be burned. The Vatican's reasoning was that future generations might need to understand this heresy to combat it, but the real reason was simpler and more human. The documents contained medical and psychological observations that fascinated the Church's scholars. Here was forbidden knowledge that, while horrifying in its acquisition, might offer insights into human nature and consciousness that could be obtained no other way. The Church had become the guardian of evil texts, preserving them in the name of preventing future evil, yet unable to destroy knowledge, even when that knowledge was soaked in innocent blood. The story of the Crimson Cardinals feast and its network serves as a chilling reminder that institutions, no matter how sacred their mission, can become vehicles for unimaginable horror when individual ambition combines with unchecked authority. The 47 church officials involved were not anomalies or mentally disturbed outliers. They were educated, respected members of the Catholic hierarchy who convinced themselves that their pursuit of divine power justified any means, any sacrifice, any crime. But our investigation is not yet complete. In our final episode, we will reveal what happened in the 20th century when researchers began piecing together the fragments of this conspiracy. We will uncover evidence suggesting that knowledge of these rituals survived into modern times, and we will explore the possibility that similar cases have occurred in recent decades, hidden beneath the Church's continued policy of suppression rather than revelation. The question that haunts us now is whether this evil was truly contained in the 1850s, or whether it merely learned to hide more effectively, waiting in the shadows of church basements and monastery crypts for the next desperate soul seeking power through forbidden means. The children who died, the families who never learned the truth, and the church officials who sacrificed their sanity to expose this conspiracy all deserve to have their stories told. But more than that, we who hear these stories must ask ourselves what other secrets still lie buried in the archives of powerful institutions. What other horrors hide behind walls of respectability and religious authority? The sealed chest remained untouched in the Vatican secret archives for 137 years, hidden in a chamber so restricted that only a handful of people even knew of its existence. But on March 15, 1987, everything changed. Before we reveal what happened when that chest was finally opened and what it means for us today, let me ask you one final question. Are you prepared to learn that some evils never truly die, they just learn to wait? Drop a comment with your answer, because what you're about to discover will challenge everything you thought you knew about how the powerful protect their darkest secrets. The discovery was entirely accidental. The Vatican had commissioned a comprehensive renovation of the secret archives, a project designed to modernize storage facilities and improve preservation of historical documents. A team of archivists, led by Dr. Father Giuseppe Marchetti, was cataloging materials in Section 12, a restricted area containing documents related to internal church investigations from the 18th and 19th centuries. Behind a wall of ordinary storage boxes, they discovered a small iron door that appeared on no architectural plans of the building. The door was locked with a mechanism that hadn't been used in over a century. When they finally opened it, they found a chamber roughly 10 feet square, completely empty, except for a single wooden chest in the center. The chest bore 3 wax seals, one with the insignia of Pope Pius I, and two others that archivists couldn't immediately identify. A metal plate on the chest's lid carried an inscription in Latin, "By papal authority to be opened only by direct order of a sitting pope, 1851. Dr. Marchetti understood immediately that he had found something significant. He contacted his superiors, and within hours, a special commission of 3 cardinals arrived to assess the discovery. The debate that followed lasted 2 days. The chest's inscription was clear: it should only be opened by papal order. But Pope John Paul II was traveling abroad, and the cardinals were faced with a choice between waiting weeks for his return or examining the contents to determine if immediate action was required. They chose to open the chest. What they found inside changed the trajectory of all their lives. The documents, perfectly preserved in the dry atmosphere of the hidden chamber, told the complete story of the Crimson Cardinals' feast. Cardinal Borromeo's journal, the medical record showing age regression, the ledger with 36 names and dates, letters from the network members, and most disturbing of all, the theological treatises written by the exiled cardinals, complete with instructions for replicating their rituals. Dr. Marchetti spent 3 days reading through the materials before suffering what his colleagues described as a complete nervous breakdown. He was found in his office, documents scattered around him, repeating over and over, "They're still here. The words are still alive." He was immediately placed on medical leave and sent to a private psychiatric facility operated by the Church. He never returned to work at the Vatican archives. In interviews decades later, conducted from the monastery where he spent his remaining years, he would say only, "Some knowledge is a poison that infects the soul. I read words that should never have been preserved." These cases and others like them suggest that knowledge of the Crimson Cardinals' rituals may have survived and found new practitioners throughout the 20th century. The Vatican has never acknowledged any connection between these incidents and the 1847 conspiracy, but researchers have noted the pattern: isolated religious communities, disappearing young people, Vatican intervention to suppress investigation, and permanent sealing of all records. The consistency is troubling. The digital age has made suppression increasingly difficult. In 2003, documents allegedly from the 1987 discovery appeared on an anonymous website dedicated to Vatican conspiracies. The Church's response was swift denial, claiming the documents were sophisticated forgeries. Yet forensic analysis by independent experts suggested the papers were genuine period documents, complete with correct paper composition and ink chemistry for the 1850s. How these documents were digitized and leaked remains a mystery, though suspicion has fallen on archivists sympathetic to transparency who may have preserved digital copies before the resealing. The question that haunts modern researchers is not whether the Crimson Cardinals conspiracy happened, the evidence is overwhelming, but whether its influence continues today. The theological arguments developed by Cardinal Santori and refined by Bishop Beaumont have been found in various forms in seized documents from fringe religious groups. Some Catholic traditionalist movements, particularly those that reject Vatican II reforms, have been investigated for possessing copies of the forbidden treatises. While no evidence has emerged of active ritual practice, the fact that these ideas continue to circulate suggests that the poison planted in 1847 has not been fully eradicated. The Church's institutional response has evolved over time. Modern oversight mechanisms make it much harder for a conspiracy of this scale to develop undetected. Background checks, psychological evaluations, and regular audits of religious communities are now standard practice. But these safeguards were implemented without ever publicly acknowledging what they were designed to prevent. The Church learned from its mistakes, but refuses to openly admit those mistakes were made. For the victims and their families, justice remains eternally denied. The 36 children killed in Rome, the 7 young women murdered in Bruges, the countless others who fell victim to the network, none received acknowledgement or memorial. Their names exist only in sealed archives, their graves unmarked or unknown, their families told comforting lies that denied them even the dignity of truth. This is perhaps the conspiracy's most enduring crime, not just the murders themselves, but the institutional decision to protect reputation over acknowledging the humanity of those who suffered. The story of the Crimson Cardinals feast serves as a stark reminder that evil often flourishes not despite institutional power, but because of it. The Cardinals were able to commit their atrocities precisely because they held positions of trust and authority. The network spread because church hierarchy provided both cover and communication channels. And the suppression succeeded for so long because the institution valued its image more than truth or justice. These dynamics are not unique to the Catholic Church. They exist in any powerful organization where authority is concentrated and accountability is weak. As we close this investigation, we must confront an uncomfortable reality. The complete truth about the Crimson Cardinals feast may never be fully known. The Vatican archives contain secrets that will remain sealed for generations, if not forever. Other evidence has been destroyed, lost, or remains hidden in locations we cannot access. What we have uncovered is almost certainly only a fraction of the full horror. How many more victims were there? How many more participants escaped detection? How many other locations were compromised? These questions may never be answered, but what we do know is sufficient to draw clear conclusions. Between 1847 and at least the 1850s, and possibly extending into the 20th century, members of the Catholic Church hierarchy conducted ritualistic cannibalism justified by twisted theology. Dozens of children and young adults were murdered. The Church, upon discovering these crimes, chose suppression over justice, prioritizing institutional protection over accountability. And today, more than 170 years later, that policy of suppression continues, with the most detailed evidence still sealed away from public scrutiny. What do you think about this dark chapter in religious history? Do you believe the Vatican's continued suppression is justified to protect faith, or does truth matter more than institutional reputation? Could similar horrors be hidden within other powerful organizations, religious or secular, protected by walls of secrecy and authority? Leave your comments below and share your thoughts. If this investigation has opened your eyes to the secrets that powerful institutions keep, subscribe to our channel for more hidden histories that challenge official narratives. Hit that notification bell because we're committed to uncovering truths that others want to keep buried. Share this video with someone who's not afraid to question authority and examine the dark corners of history. The crimson robes of cardinals were meant to symbolize martyrdom and sacrifice for faith, but for Cardinal Santori and his conspirators, those red robes became symbols of actual blood spilled in pursuit of twisted immortality. The feast they prepared was not a celebration of spiritual communion, but a descent into humanity's darkest capabilities, and the legacy of their evil continues to haunt us. A reminder that the most horrifying monsters often wear the most respected masks. The truth is out there, buried in sealed archives and hidden documents, waiting for those brave enough to seek it. Some secrets may never be fully revealed, but every fragment of truth we uncover brings us closer to understanding how evil operates and how institutions enable it. The Crimson Cardinals feast is one chapter in a much larger story of power, secrecy, and the eternal struggle between truth and concealment. Remember, history's darkest truths are not ancient myths or supernatural tales. They are documented acts committed by real people, in positions of authority, hidden by institutions that valued reputation over justice. The question is not whether such evils existed in the past, but whether they continue today, protected by the same mechanisms of suppression that allowed the Crimson Cardinals to operate for so long.